In this module, we're going to learn how to create stylized foliage in 3ds Max. So here we are back in 3ds Max, and now that we finished with our sculpting of the tree and the rocks, we can finally go ahead and create some foliage. And this is more of a little bit of a bonus because this tutorial was more about sculpting and ZBrush stylized work, but I wanted to just throw this bit in just to give you a little bit of a closure on this project. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a plane here. And I'm going to make it 1024 by 1024, but size doesn't really matter as long as it's squared. And I'm just going to make sure it's on the 0. So we're going to start by creating some grass blades. And whenever I start with the grass blades, I always want to make a square behind just so I know how to bake it on a texture. And again, this tutorial is not exactly on a texturing part, but it's always good to be prepared. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all the unnecessary edges here. Right click, convert to editable poly. And whenever I make grass blades, I generally tend to do 3 to 4 different pieces. I usually tend to go for a long one, a tall one, and just a standard grass piece. So perhaps I'm just going to move this down and remove this one here. So here we have a grass plane for the long grass, a tall grass, and just a standard grass over here. So let's go ahead and start making a grass blade. I'm just going to actually go ahead and move this back somewhere right here. And the way I make grass is pretty much the same as I make the tree trunks, and I use curves. So I'm going to go ahead into my curves, line, and let's go ahead and create one grass blade here. So I'm going to go in, click and hold just to give it a little bit of a curve here. It looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and create another line. And just like we did with a trunk, we need a line to create a shape. So I'm going to go and hold Shift and just create one straight line here. I'm going to go into my compound objects, loft, and let's just make sure we got this one selected. Loft, get shape, and select here. So here we go. And now just like with the branches, we can just go ahead and use these curves to create our necessary shapes. And sometimes, really depending on the situation, oftentimes I would use Photoshop to just paint some grass on. And sometimes I would model it in 3ds Max. It really depends on what you want. If you want your grass to have a little bit of a 3D shape to it and be a little bit more deep, you would want to model that. If you want just really subtle, very soft grass, you would want to just make that in Photoshop. You wouldn't really need a normal map for that. So I'm going to go ahead into my loft here. And just like before, I'll go into scale and just move that down here and move this one up right here. That's perfect. I can probably add one Bezier curve over here and just see if it looks a little bit better. I want to make sure that the curve is always straight so that I don't get any weird grass. The grass always tends to, start thick and get thinner no matter what. So that looks pretty good. Unlike with our branches, I really actually want to add a little bit of a twist to that as well. So I'm going to click on twist here. And I'm just going to go ahead and crank this up a little bit. And as you can see, I don't want the bottom to twist at all. I just want the top. But I don't want to overdo it because whenever you have too much twist in your normal map, it might actually look slightly strange. So that's perfect. And now this grass blade is pretty much ready. The last thing I want to do is I just want to go ahead and actually add a little bit of shape to that. But before that, as you can see, we have a little bit of a geometry problem here, and there's quite a few unnecessary edges. So I'm going to go ahead and instead of converting it to editable poly, I'm just going to add edit poly modifier, select edges, and first let's fix those here. So I'm just going to double click on those, hold Control and backspace to delete those and the vertices. And let's go ahead and do the same for these ones over here. I don't want any of these because they're just too much. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a shell modifier. Move it slightly back. Let's make it a little thicker. And then I'm just going to slap a turbo smooth on top of that. Perhaps add 2 divisions. And that looks pretty good. I really like this. I'm going to go back into my loft here. Click yes. And just want to make sure that it's not too thin, so I'm just going to actually go ahead and make this a little thicker here, and the base as well. You always have to be careful whenever you add the editable poly and you coming back to the stacks underneath, that your editable poly won't have any artifacts or glitches after that. The way stacks work in 3ds Max, some are destructible and some are not. So, if you add editable poly, it's one of the destructible ones. So if anything that before the editable poly usually wouldn't work, but if you're just making a small change, it shouldn't really matter. So this is pretty much it for this clip. In the next clip, we're going to go ahead and create some more grass blades and duplicate those a little bit.